Keir Starmer is the shortest-serving Labour Prime Minister since Ramsay MacDonald in 1924, so in a century, clocking in at just 1 year and 352 days. That's about a year shorter than Gordon Brown. He was the next shortest, who was seen off by a global financial crisis. Of course, unlike Brown, Starmer doesn't really have any external excuses to point to for his downfall. There was a war, but it didn't really sort of damage his premiership. So it seems like it was pretty much entirely self-made. So where exactly did it all go wrong? Well, being exceptionally and publicly duplicitous didn't help, and the warning signs go all the way back to the way he won the election to become leader of the opposition.
You made 10 policy pledges for this campaign. Let's see how watertight they are. Can you guarantee that under your leadership, the 2019 Labour commitments to nationalise water, energy, rail, the Royal Mail, they'll all be in Labour's next election manifesto?
I've made that commitment.
Those 4 industries will be in the Labour manifesto for nationalisation come 2024.
They will.
That was, of course, Keir Starmer speaking to Andrew Neil during his 2020 campaign to replace a recently resigned Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader. Within months, all but renationalising railways was, of course, abandoned. In that interview, Starmer also refused to criticise his former boss. But that didn't last long. Just a few months later, Starmer suspended Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party after he claimed his political opponents had dramatically overstated the scale of anti-Semitism in the party. And in 2023, Starmer's Labour banned Corbyn from running as a Labour candidate in his Islington North constituency. Corbyn, of course, went on to win it anyway. And that was despite Starmer going full Judas in between.
I'm not going to rank Jeremy Corbyn. He's a colleague. He's a friend, and he's led us through some really difficult times in the Labour Party.
Is he a friend? Was he a friend?
No, I mean, as I say, I haven't spoken to him for 2.5 years.
Was never a friend.
No, not in the sense that we were, went to visit each other or anything like that. I worked with him as a colleague, but as I say, I haven't spoken to Jeremy now for 2.5 years.
But while that duplicity against the left pissed off hundreds of thousands of people on the Labour left, and the left more generally, he basically got a pass from the mainstream press on that issue. And he went on to position himself as an honest man when he entered number 10.
Now, this wound, this lack of trust, can only be healed by actions, not words. I know that.
God, he has really aged in the last 2 years. That's kind of the only thing that really makes me feel sympathy for him, which is clearly, the job is difficult. He presumably hasn't got that much sleep. Anyway, back to the narrative. The project of rebuilding public trust in politics never got off the ground, with 2 pivotal policies making the Starmer government look, frankly, a bit cruel.
I don't want to cut the winter fuel allowance. I don't think anybody government wants to do that. But we've got to fix the foundations of our economy. And that's what this is all about, making sure that we fix the foundations.
So your own impact assessment for these reforms says that 250,000 people could fall into relative poverty because of these changes, including 50,000 children. How comfortable do you feel about a Labour government pushing that many people into poverty as a result of your cuts?
Well, it all depends on how people respond to changes.
So that was, of course, the winter fuel payment cut, and then the welfare reforms, which are trying to get rid of £5 billion from the welfare bill with no real justification as to why it was fair or just saying, well, we need to save a bit of money, so we'll do it this way. Both of those were, of course, after lots of pressure, ultimately reversed, meaning Starmer lost both public trust as well as his authority as a leader, and also that he didn't save any money. Now, that had been entrusted, so the authority had been entrusted with this man, Morgan McSweeney. He became Starmer's chief advisor when he was Prime Minister. And before that, though, McSweeney had been head of Labour Together, a group whose aim was to get rid of the left within Labour and install Keir Starmer as party leader, even if it meant failing to declare £750,000 in private donations. It would later emerge that Labour Together's next leader, former Starmer cabinet minister Josh Simons, had paid a US firm to spy on journalists, including friend of the show Paul Holden, before reporting them to GCHQ as falsely having Kremlin links. Now, Simons resigned from the cabinet and later gave up his Makerfield seat to allow Andy Burnham to run. It's also widely understood that Simons may become Burnham's chief of staff when he becomes Prime Minister. We'll put that to one side for a moment. Slightly worrying. Anyway, back to Starmer. It was his apparent dependence on McSweeney that led to one of his greatest errors in office. This was Keir Starmer speaking in Washington, D.C. in February 2025.
I've only just arrived, but already I can feel there's a real buzz around Washington right now. You can sense that there's a new leader in town, that he's a true one-off, a pioneer in business and in politics. Many people love him. Others love to hate him. But to us, he's just Peter.
He wouldn't be laughing for long. That was Keir Starmer celebrating the appointment of Peter Mandelson, the self-proclaimed best pal of paedophile sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, as, of course, UK ambassador to the United States. That job, as you know, didn't last too long. In September last year, Mandelson was sacked over the undisclosed extent of his relationship with Epstein, which included a contribution to the notorious birthday book put together by his sex trafficking co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell in 2006. Further revelations snowballed. In February, documents from the Epstein files suggested Mandelson had leaked sensitive government information to Epstein while Mandelson was a minister in Gordon Brown's cabinet, leading to a police investigation being launched. That led to Mandelson's arrest on suspicion of misconduct in public office later that month. Of course, Mandelson denies all the allegations. Also, it led to the resignation of McSweeney, Starmer's right-hand man. It kept getting worse, though, with yet further scandal when it emerged that Mandelson had failed his security vetting before his appointment, though had somehow been overruled. It's a mystery we never quite got to the bottom of, though it did result in this rare admission from Keir Starmer.
Let me start where I must start, which is to accept, as I do, that I made a mistake in appointing Peter Mandelson. And let me follow that up swiftly, as I've done before, but I need to do it again, with an apology to the victims of Epstein for appointing Peter Mandelson. It was my mistake, and I take responsibility in relation to it.
Starmer may have taken responsibility. He didn't resign. Of course, he made someone else fall on the sword. Of course, history has now taken care of that. But despite the grossness of the Mandelson appointment, the betrayal of Labour values, and the attempt to completely purge the left from Labour's ranks, none of that will likely be what Starmer is remembered for. Instead, it'll be the callous indifference he showed and the diplomatic cover he provided to what may be the greatest crime of our lifetimes, committed by an ally that Starmer has consistently refused to challenge.
I'm very clear. Israel must have that, does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Keir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
There's a lot of different work that goes on. I'm also aware that some or quite a bit of what goes on here can't necessarily be talked about all of the time. It isn't, although we're really proud of what you're doing, we can't necessarily tell the world what you're doing here. And therefore, it makes it really important to say thank you, to acknowledge that.
Now, in a written statement from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, to the House, she has made it clear that she has decided to prescribe Palestine action under Section 3 of the Terrorism Act 2000.
Is the UK still a friend of Israel?
Banseka, a lot to choose from there. Which of those various betrayals do you think, or failures, flaws, outrages, sort of has the most to do with Starmer's downfall?
You know, there was a lot of conversation, of course, about two-child benefit cap, the winter fuel allowance. These are things which I think were egregious mistakes and were very bad things to start out your premiership on, just to start out completely negative. But I have to say, I don't think I heard Gaza being mentioned once, actually, in the coverage. And whilst I get that it's characterised somewhat as a left-wing thing and statistically people on the left will care about it more, I do think it's something which has been seriously instrumental to his downfall and his inability to be able to hold his voter base together. We know statistically that that's the number one reason why they've lost their base of voters, mostly to the Greens, it looks like, right? It's because of the failures on Gaza, this insistence on propping up the genocidal actions of the Israeli state has been morally egregious, disgusting. For me, I think for a lot of people, pardon me, it was the tipping point. I left before, actually, in the Labour Party before it got to that point, but I know a lot of people personally where that was just the red line that was crossed was that. And it's kind of been omitted from the media record, the way they're discussing it today. And a part of me finds that quite scary and quite eerie, actually, that that's just not even talked about as part of this man's legacy. He's very much allowed to get away with talking about supporting, being an emblem of the rule of law and a sort of general beacon of goodness on the international stage, when of course he hasn't been. He's aided and abetted a genocide, as have some of his cabinet members as well.
And I suppose it also sort of, because I think the running thread through all of these is that he does appear to be a man without a sort of moral compass and who feels like lying and shifting opinion from day to day for the purposes of political expediency is perfectly acceptable. And just as sort of like he said, oh, Corbyn is my friend, and then Corbyn is the devil incarnate. And just as he said, I'm going to nationalise all these things, then afterwards said, no, it's crazy. Of course I'm not going to nationalise those things. Here, he did spend his life, it wasn't a lie, he did spend his life as a human rights lawyer, like defending people who were sort of being charged with state overreach. So like, obviously you'll remember the advert that he sort of made to be leader of the Labour Party, where he's defending all of these, he's defending the people on the miners' strike, where he's defending people who are getting sort of charged by or prosecuted or sort of attacked by McDonald's. All of these people where he is trying to defend their rights against what he sees as state or corporate overreach. So clearly there was a large period of his life where what defined him was a commitment to civil liberties and human rights. And then the moment he enters power, like he is probably the most authoritarian prime minister we've had in a very long time.
I think there was a period of time where he's obviously at the CPS where I think he does have a bit of a change in step in terms of, the positioning. I think he was somewhat draconian, on certain areas and certain aspects as well. So I don't think it was as sharp as he gets into power politically and then there's a quick step change. I think there's probably some kind of a gradual change there.
Lots of people, obviously I don't know the guy, lots of people, sort of the political journalists, when they talk about him, really now highlight how competitive he is and how he just always, he just thought he wanted to be prime minister because he'd be good at it. It turned out, actually, you do have to believe in something. The point you made about how the media isn't really, or the mainstream media isn't really talking about Gaza or anything like that. One, you might say it's because they feel implicated as well. Jeremy Gilbert, a friend of the show, had an interesting tweet today where he said, the reason no one is talking about this is because it is still the case that the media don't see sort of the left in the country, which is a significant minority, as being legitimate or meaningful. And he's saying that a big reason why Keir Starmer has failed is because, first of all, through sort of purging people from the Labour Party, but then more significantly, actually, through Gaza, like there's a big chunk of left-wing and ethnic minority Britain who absolutely despise this man. And one, that is, that's what led to the Green Surge. And there is a very direct line between the Green Surge and Starmer having to resign. Like, he wouldn't have resigned without the Green Surge. So that's, like, that does need an important part in the conversation for that reason. Jeremy Gilbert was also saying, all of these people who are more politically engaged than average, so like left-wing people or ethnic minorities that really care about Palestine, obviously there's a big crossover between, that's not two distinct groups, but they are sort of in electoral senses, sort of segmentations. You see that on the Palestine marches, right? They have friends, like they talk to people. And once upon a time, they would have been telling people, oh, you should go out and vote Labour, yada, 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 and sort of sharing sort of like good vibes about Labour. And there might be, their colleagues might have said, I see where you're coming from, but I don't really agree with this or that, or like I feel like he doesn't really understand the economy. Various things that might make you think, okay, my colleague is really sort of backing Labour, but I disagree. Whereas now, your left-wing colleague is telling you Keir Starmer is scum. Your right-wing colleague is telling you Keir Starmer is scum. And it's like, who in this, like, people talk to each other, and it matters if there's like no one in the workplace, like no one in the pub, no one at the party, like, who is the person who will defend this man? And that does give you I think that is probably one of the reasons why he is so unpopular, because there's no one to defend him.
Yeah.
And no one knows anyone who likes Keir Starmer.
And these groups of people, they're not operating in silos, like you said, right? They're not just kind of in these little bubbles, these tiny niche bubbles that do not touch the rest of, normies. Basically, I think that's sometimes how like the media and the media class see it, right? Here's this bubble of like strange left-wing people who don't know anybody else. I mean, I remember when I first went to start canvassing for Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 for the Labour Party, I brought friends with me, people who were not political, people who were thinking about voting Tory, and they ended up canvassing with me and voting Labour in 2017. So of course, like that happens, people talk, people express ideas. And so of course that changes things. And I think the media ultimately, really, I just think their natural inclination is to believe that a sensible seeming, centrist looking guy with a nice haircut and a suit is the rightful man to lead the Labour Party. And it is to them, Keir Starmer taking over the Labour Party was like a return to business as usual. It's a return to what's right, how things should be. And so implicitly, subconsciously, or maybe very consciously, I don't know, I think they just looked at him and just thought, yeah, that's
going to work.
That's fine. That is what it is. This is back to, that Corbyn thing, that was a bit of an aberration. That was wacky. But now here's back to business as usual. And so they felt no need to really question the methods that were being enacted on the left, which we would then see enacted on other groups of people as well. They felt no need to question and query of any of that, because his rise to power just confirmed how they think the world should be and how it should look like. And that is to the detriment of this country, because if they'd actually done their job properly, Keir Starmer may have never become Prime Minister because of all the stuff we would have known about him and the judgments the public would have been able to make about him much, much earlier. So the media have a lot to answer, I think, on this.
And obviously none of this is to say that you can win a general election by just pleasing that progressive sort of significant minority and their friends. But also, if you actively go out to denigrate them, dismiss them, offend them, and I mean, you can afford to do that if you're Nigel Farage or a Tory Prime Minister, because there will be some right-wing people in the workplace who will defend you. Like, people will know someone who's, you might not like Farage, but one person who thinks he's like legitimate and really represents them.
You're taking care of your base.
Yeah, but if you need a base, right? You need a base. If you have no base, you're screwed. You don't want to be completely in hock to your base. You want to be able to disagree with your base, to try and lead your base, to sort of take them on a journey. But if you just put up your middle finger at them and call them scum, it's not a good idea. I don't think it ever works.